bleeding silver fluid and covered in the smoking ash of a dying star, a 7-foot-tall woman stepped into my bedroom at exactly 3 a.m. She emerged from a sudden ozone-scented void where my wall had silently ceased to exist. Peering down at my terrified face with dimming, glowing eyes, she whispered, "Human, will you clean me?" The digital display on the microwave was the brightest thing in the apartment. 3 a.m. I was sitting at the laminate kitchen table, staring at a lukewarm cup of instant coffee, trying to unsmell my workday. I'm a trauma cleaner. When someone dies alone, or a meth lab blows up, or an industrial meat grinder malfunctions, they call me. You spend enough time scrubbing human misery out of floorboards, and the scent of iron and ammonia permanently settles into your sinuses. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. The rain lashed against the single-pane window, rattling the cheap glass. Then the air pressure dropped. It wasn't subtle. My ears popped painfully the way they do when a plane goes into a steep dive. The hairs on my arms stood at attention. A low, bass-heavy hum vibrated through the soles of my boots, rattling the coffee mug against the table. I stood up instinctively, reaching for the heavy steel flashlight I kept by the sink. The space between my television and the front door tore open. There was no light show, no swirling vortex of colors. The air just split, revealing a jagged, inky blackness that smelled intensely of burned copper and raw ozone. The tear hung there, edges bleeding a faint violent violet. A hand gripped the edge of the tear. It was encased in matte black armor, the metal deeply scored and hissing. A figure hauled itself through the breach, falling heavily onto my scuffed hardwood floor. The tear snapped shut instantly behind them, leaving the apartment plunging back into the dim orange glow of the streetlights outside. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The cynical part of my brain, the part that kept me alive in bad neighborhoods and worse situations, told me to bolt for the fire escape. But I stood frozen, gripping the flashlight like an idiot, watching the intruder try to rise. It was a woman, or at least she possessed a silhouette that read as female. But she was massive. Even crumpled on her hands and knees, she was towering. If she stood straight, she'd easily clear 7 feet. Her body was clad in a segmented biomechanical suit that looked like it had been chewed on by a giant set of jaws. She lifted her head. Her skin was a pale, striking grey, marred by streaks of luminescent silver fluid blood. Her eyes were solid, pupil-less pools of cold amber. But it wasn't the silver blood or the alien eyes that caught my attention. It was the sludge. Clinging to her left shoulder, eating through the dense armor plate and sinking into the grey flesh beneath, was a thick, bubbling mass of black residue. It moved like it was alive, writhing and smoking. Where it touched the floorboards, the wood hissed instantly, turning into blackened rot. She looked at me. Her breathing was a wet, ragged rasp. A metallic collar around her throat clicked and whirred, and when she spoke, the voice was a synthesized, perfectly articulated English, overlaying a dual-toned alien harmony. "Human," she choked out, her amber eyes dimming as the black sludge surged deeper into her collarbone. "Will you clean me?" Her arms gave out. She collapsed face first onto the floor, the heavy thud shaking the room. I stared at her motionless form. I stared at the smoking black mass rapidly dissolving my security deposit. "Call the cops," my brain screamed. "Call the feds. Run!" But I looked at that black sludge. It was a chemical reaction. It was a contaminant. And if there was one thing in this miserable, exhausted life I actually understood, it was a mess. "God damn it, Dean," I muttered. I dropped the flashlight and sprinted to my utility closet. I didn't grab a gun. I grabbed my work gear, 2 heavy-duty chemical-resistant PVC tarps, a box of thick nitrile gloves, a full-face respirator, and my heavy plastic tote of commercial solvents. I rushed back into the living room. She was still out cold. The black sludge had grown, eating another inch of her armor. The smell was horrendous, like burning hair and battery acid. I quickly unrolled the thick PVC tarp next to her. Grabbing her by her uninjured right arm, I hauled. She weighed a ton easily, 300 pounds of dense muscle and metal, but adrenaline is a hell of a drug. I dragged her onto the tarp, saving my remaining floorboards from the corrosive dripping. I snapped on my gloves and pulled the respirator over my face. I leaned in close to the wound. The black substance wasn't fire. It wasn't radiation. It was eating the material at a molecular level, breaking down the carbon and alloys alike. It crackled softly, a hungry, wet sound. "Okay, E.T.," I breathed through the mask. "Let's see what you're dealing with." I reached into my tote and pulled out a pack of industrial pH test strips. I didn't know alien biology, but chemistry is chemistry. I took a pair of long metal tweezers, grabbed a strip and touched it to the edge of the black bubbling mass. The strip instantly turned a violent dark crimson before the paper itself dissolved into ash. Extreme acid. Hyper-aggressive. If I used water, it might cause a thermal reaction and boil her alive. I needed a base, a strong, immediate alkaline to neutralize the reaction. I dug frantically through my tote. I bypassed the heavy acids, the bleaches, the enzyme cleaners. My hand closed around a large, heavy jug of pure industrial sodium hydroxide solution, heavy-duty lye drain opener, and a massive box of commercial baking soda. "This is either going to save you or melt you faster," I said to the unconscious giant. "Sorry in advance." I dumped a massive mound of baking soda directly onto the writhing black sludge. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. A thick cloud of white, choking smoke erupted from her shoulder. The sludge shrieked a literal high-pitched squeal like a kettle boiling dry. The alien woman's eyes snapped open. She didn't scream, but her entire massive frame convulsed her teeth, bearing in an expression of absolute, unadulterated agony. She tried to thrash her heavy right arm, swinging blindly toward me. "Hold still," I barked, dodging the blow that would have easily shattered my ribs. I threw my body weight over her right arm, pinning it to the floor. "It's neutralizing. Let it work." She couldn't understand me through the haze of pain, but the clicking translator on her neck caught the tone. She locked her amber eyes onto mine, her chest heaving. The silver blood pumped faster from her wounds, mixing with the white powder. The baking soda had stopped the immediate spread, caking the black sludge into a crusty, smoking grey paste. But it wasn't enough. The core of the substance was still eating into her flesh. I needed to flush it, and fast. I grabbed the jug of lye solution, poured a careful measure into a spray bottle, and diluted it with cold water to prevent a severe exothermic burn. "Brace yourself," I said, pointing the nozzle at the wound. I sprayed. The grey paste bubbled violently, turning into a foul-smelling brown liquid. The alien woman arched her back, a deep, guttural groan vibrating from her chest. Her fingers dug into the thick PVC tarp, slicing through it like wet tissue paper. "Almost there," I muttered, sweating profusely beneath the respirator. I grabbed a heavy abrasive scrubbing sponge, the kind I used to strip grease off restaurant kitchen walls. I doused it in a mixture of water and heavy-duty degreaser. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the sponge directly into the wound and scrubbed. She let out a sharp gasp, her head falling back against the floor. I worked quickly, brutally. Trauma cleaning isn't gentle. You don't dab, you scour. I dug the sponge into the crater of her shoulder, wiping away the neutralized brown liquid, scraping out the dead, blackened tissue, and pulling away the dissolved shards of her armor. As I worked, the hissing stopped. The terrible smell of burning copper faded, replaced by the sharp synthetic lemon scent of my degreaser. I pulled the sponge away. The black sludge was completely gone. What remained was a terrifyingly deep but clean wound in her grey flesh. The silver blood was already beginning to coagulate, forming a crystalline scab across the exposed tissue. I slumped back onto my heels, pulling the respirator off my face and gasping for the cool, damp air of the apartment. I looked down at my gloves. They were stained silver and brown. On the tarp, the giant woman was taking slow, deep breaths. The tension had bled out of her massive frame. She slowly turned her head to look at her shoulder. She stared at the clean, crystallizing wound for a long, silent minute. Then she looked at me. The void rot. Her synthesized voice echoed in the quiet room. You purged it. I hit it with an alkaline base and some lemon-scented degreaser, I said, wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my arm. Basic chemistry. You're lucky you crashed into a janitor's apartment. She slowly pushed herself up, wincing as her shoulder moved. Even sitting on the floor, she was at eye level with me, standing. She looked around my cramped, dingy apartment, at the peeling wallpaper, the dripping kitchen faucet, the cheap television. I didn't crash, she said softly. I targeted the nearest sector with a high concentration of biocide signatures. My combat matrix calculated a 0.004% chance of survival if I jumped to this primitive coordinate. She reached up with her good hand and touched the edge of her wound. Her amber eyes flickered with genuine disbelief. The rot is a Class 9 engineered bioweapon. It consumes organic matter and synthetic alloys indiscriminately. It reduced my entire vanguard to ash in less than 4 cycles. She looked at the yellow sponge sitting on the tarp, then at the plastic spray bottle of degreaser. What highly advanced molecular destabilizer did you use? She asked, her voice dropping into a tone of quiet awe. What rare element commands such destructive power over the rot? I looked at the spray bottle. I looked at the box of Arm & Hammer baking soda. That's baking soda, I said, pointing to the box. We use it to make bread rise, and to keep the fridge from smelling bad. The spray is mostly water and lye. It unclogs hair from drains. She stared at me. The translation matrix clicked frantically at her throat, as if struggling to find the equivalent concepts in her language. You use a bioweapon neutralizer to deodorize your food storage units. Yeah. I shrugged, feeling the absurdity of the situation finally catching up to me. I walked over to the kitchen, grabbed a clean rag, ran it under the tap, and tossed it to her. Wipe the rest of the silver off your face. What's your name, anyway? She caught the wet rag effortlessly. She held it for a moment, examining the cheap cotton threads. I am Commander Coriel of the 7th Stellar Vanguard, she said, finally pressing the cloth to her face. And you human? Dean, I said. Just Dean. Dean, she repeated. The name sounded strange heavy in her dual-toned voice. You possess a terrifying mastery over chemical warfare, Dean. My people have burned entire orbital platforms trying to stop the rot, and you dismantled it with, she gestured to the sponge, kitchen implements. I let out a short, cynical bark of a laugh. I leaned against the counter, suddenly feeling the bone-deep exhaustion of a 60-hour work week crashing down on me. Welcome to Earth, Coriel, I said, crossing my arms. We're a dirty species. We had to get really, really good at cleaning up. She didn't laugh. She looked at me with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up again. She looked at my calloused hands, at my stained boots, and then back to my eyes. "Then it is as the scattered reports claimed," she whispered, leaning forward. "Your world is a death world, and your people. You are the immune response." I stared at her, the hum of the old refrigerator, suddenly sounding very loud in the silence. The rain continued to beat against the glass. "I don't know about all that," I sighed, picking up my cold mug of coffee. "But I do know that you bled silver all over my PVC tarp, and you're going to help me roll it up before it stains." Coriel looked down at the tarp, then back at me. A faint, strange expression crossed her alien features, the shadow of a smirk. "Understood, Dean," she said, rolling up a heavy PVC tarp coated in alien blood, neutralized bioweapons, and the charred remnants of my security deposit was a two-person job. Coriel did the heavy lifting. I directed. She moved with a stiff, calculated precision. Her shoulder was clearly bothering her, the crystalline scab stretching tight across her grey skin, but she didn't complain. She just gripped the thick plastic, folding the corners inward to trap the mess, her massive hands dwarfing the material. "In my sector, a biological containment breach requires a localized plasma bombardment," Coriel said quietly. She watched as I taped the rolled tarp shut with thick strips of silver duct tape. "We burn the atmosphere. We shatter the bedrock. It is the only way to ensure the rot does not spread. Plasma bombardment is rough on the drywall," I said, tearing the tape with my teeth. I slapped the final piece down. "Around here, we bag it, tag it, and take it to the municipal incinerator. Less paperwork." I dragged the heavy bundle to the corner of the room, right next to my collection of battered mops. I walked to the kitchen sink, peeled off my ruined nitrile gloves, and washed my hands with harsh dish soap. The water ran black, then silver, then clear. I grabbed a clean glass, filled it with tap water, and set it on the counter. I pulled a fresh bottle of ibuprofen from my cabinet, shook out 4 pills, and set them next to the glass. "Take these," I said, pointing to the pills. "Anti-inflammatories. They block pain receptors. Assuming your biology is carbon-based, and your liver can handle a little synthetic relief." Coriel approached the counter. She stared at the tiny white pills like they were unexploded ordnance. She picked one up between her thumb and forefinger, examining it. Then, with a quick, decisive movement, she swallowed all 4 dry, chasing it with the entire glass of water. She paused, looking at the empty glass. "Your water is heavy. It tastes of calcium and iron." "Old pipes," I said, leaning back against the sink. "So, Commander Coriel of the 7th Stellar Vanguard. Who shot you?" She set the glass down. The amber light in her eyes dimmed, a heavy terrestrial exhaustion settling over her broad shoulders. She leaned against my cheap laminate counter, and I heard the wood creak in protest. "The Krell," she said, the translator clicking softly. "A parasitic empire. They do not conquer. They consume. They drop the rot onto agricultural worlds, let it dissolve the biomass into a nutrient slurry, and harvest the remains. My vanguard was tasked with holding the orbital line at a colony called Ceres. We held for 6 solar cycles." She looked down at her hands. The armor on her forearms was deeply scored, the black metal chipped and peeling. "On the 7th cycle, they bypassed our kinetic shields." She continued, her voice devoid of inflection, which somehow made it worse. "They deployed rot spores directly into our ventilation. My squad, they melted inside their suits. I was the only one near a drop pod. I calibrated a blind jump based on chemical signatures, seeking an environment toxic enough to retard the rot's growth. I aimed for a dead world, a wasteland." She looked up at me, her gaze sweeping over my tired face. My stained work clothes, the dingy apartment. I found this. Earth? I said. Earth, she repeated. A world swimming in caustic acids, volatile bases, and neurotoxins packaged in brightly colored plastic and sold to your civilians. I couldn't help it. I laughed. It was a dry, scraping sound in the quiet apartment. You're not wrong. We poison our food, our air, our soil, and ourselves. But we're stubborn. We build tolerances. We survive. I walked into my bedroom and dug through my closet. I pulled out an old, heavy canvas winter coat, a massive thing I bought at a surplus store years ago and never wore because I was swimming in it. I brought it out and tossed it to her. Put that on, I said. Your armor is breached. It's freezing in here, and you look like you're going into shock. She caught the coat. She slipped her uninjured arm through the sleeve, wincing, as she pulled it over her damaged shoulder. It fit her like a tailored jacket. The dark green canvas contrasted sharply with her grey skin and the remnants of her black armor. Why do you possess these skills, Dean? She asked, pulling the collar up. You are not a warrior. You carry no weapons. Yet you attacked a Class 9 bioweapon without hesitation. You speak of death and containment with the cold detachment of a mortuary drone. I looked at the floor where the tarp used to be. The wood was permanently scarred, a blackened crater in my living room. I'm a trauma cleaner, I said quietly. When people die badly, the cops take the body, but they leave the blood. They leave the mess. The families. They can't handle it. They shouldn't have to. So I go in. I scrub the floors. I tear out the carpets. I make it look like nothing bad ever happened. I looked back at her. I don't fight wars, Coriel. I just clean up the aftermath. It's the only way I know how to put the world back together. 1 square foot at a time. Coriel stared at me. Her alien features were unreadable, but the hum of her translator slowed, vibrating with a low resonant frequency. You erase the scars of your dead, she murmured. You are a custodian of grief. Something like that, I muttered, suddenly feeling very exposed. I turned to grab the coffee pot. The air pressure in the room abruptly vanished. My ears popped with a sickening crack. The coffee pot slipped from my fingers, shattering against the linoleum. The streetlights outside my window flickered and died, plunging the apartment into darkness, save for the weak amber glow of Coriel's eyes. The bass-heavy hum returned, but this time it was louder. It rattled the teeth in my skull. "Dean," Coriel said. Her voice wasn't synthesized anymore. It was a raw, dual-toned alien bark. The wall next to my front door split open. The tear, in reality, wasn't small this time. It ripped from the ceiling to the floor, vomiting a cloud of freezing, ozone-scented fog into my living room. The violet light from the breach bathed the apartment in a sickly, violent hue. Something stepped through. It wasn't humanoid. It was a jagged, multi-limbed horror of rusted metal and pulsing, sickly yellow flesh. It moved on 4 articulated legs, its upper torso, a mass of optical sensors and long, wicked mechanical scythes. But the worst part was the tank strapped to its thorax. It was sloshing with the thick, black, bubbling sludge. The rot. "A Krell Seeker," Coriel shouted, stepping in front of me. She dropped into a fighting stance, favoring her bad shoulder. It tracked my biometric trail. The machine clicked its optical sensors, locking on to Coriel. It raised a mechanical arm, a pressurized nozzle extending from its wrist. It was going to spray the rot. In a confined space, we'd be liquefied in seconds. "Down!" I roared. I grabbed the heavy collar of the canvas coat I'd given her and yanked her backward with everything I had. Coriel stumbled, her massive frame throwing off the drone's targeting algorithm. A jet of black sludge erupted from the nozzle, missing us by inches and splashing against my television. The plastic and glass instantly dissolved with a horrific hiss, erupting into a cloud of toxic white smoke. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I was operating on pure blue-collar adrenaline. I dove for my work tote. My hands moved blindly through the heavy plastic bottles, shoving aside the lye and the baking soda. I needed something violent. I needed my heavy-duty concrete etcher, muriatic acid, pure undiluted 31% hydrochloric acid. My fingers closed around the thick plastic handle of the jug. In my other hand, I grabbed the heavy solid steel crowbar I used for prying up blood-soaked floorboards. The Seeker realigned its sensors, its metallic joints whining as it pivoted toward me. The nozzle hissed, preparing another volley. "Hey, ugly!" I yelled. The machine paused its visual cluster, focusing on the shouting human. I unscrewed the cap of the muriatic acid with my thumb and hurled the entire open-gallon jug directly at its optical cluster. The heavy plastic bottle struck the machine's faceplate. The impact shattered the cheap plastic, dousing the Seeker's delicate sensors, and exposed yellow flesh in highly concentrated industrial acid. The machine shrieked, a deafening metallic screech that shattered the remaining glass in my window. The acid bit into its biological components, instantly smoking and eating through its optics. It thrashed blindly at scythes, gouging deep gashes into my walls and ceiling. Coriel, the tank. I screamed over the noise, pointing with the crowbar. Coriel didn't need to be told twice. Moving with terrifying speed, she lunged forward. She grabbed one of the thrashing mechanical scythes with her good arm, planted her heavy boots onto the hardwood floor, and twisted violently. The metal snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Using the severed scythe as a makeshift spear, Coriel drove the jagged end directly into the heavy mechanical joint of the Seeker's front leg, pinning it to the ground. I rushed in. The machine was blindingly thrashing the rot tank on its back exposed. I raised the solid steel crowbar high above my head, feeling the heavy pull of the iron in my hands. I brought it down with every ounce of frustration, exhaustion, and fury I had built up over a decade of cleaning up other people's horrors. The crowbar struck the pressure valve of the rot tank. Crack! The valve shattered, but instead of spraying outward, the pressurized containment failed internally. The machine froze. A low, wet, gurgling sound emanated from its thorax. "Back away!" Coriel yelled, grabbing me by the belt and hauling me backward. We hit the floor behind my kitchen island, just as the Seeker collapsed inward. The black sludge consumed its host, eating through the Krell machine in seconds. By the time we stood up, peering over the laminate counter, there was nothing left but a smoking, blackened crater in the center of my apartment, rapidly being neutralized by the pooling muriatic acid. The violet tear in the room began to pulse, destabilizing. Coriel stood up slowly. She looked at the smoking wreckage, then at the steel crowbar still gripped tightly in my hands. "You blinded a Krell Seeker with pavement cleaner." She breathed the synthesized voice, perfectly capturing her utter disbelief, and bludgeoned its containment core with a primitive iron lever. It's high-carbon steel, actually. I wheezed, dropping the crowbar. It clattered against the linoleum. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't make a fist. And now I definitely have to move. Coriel stepped toward the pulsing violet tear. The portal was shrinking, the edges fraying. She turned to look at me, the oversized green canvas coat billowing slightly in the draft of the vortex. "The beacon is broken. They will not track me through this rift again," she said. She looked at the smoking ruin of my apartment, the shattered glass, the chemical burns on the walls. I brought war into your sanctuary, Dean. I am deeply sorry. I've cleaned up worse, I said, leaning heavily against the counter. Usually on a Tuesday. Coriel smiled. It was a small, tight expression, but it reached her amber eyes. She reached up and tapped the collar of the coat I'd given her. The vanguard is dead, but the sovereign still stands. I must return to the fleet, she said, her voice turning hard, resolute. I must tell them of this death world, a world where the inhabitants use bioweapon neutralizers to polish their flaws, and where the custodians fight like heavy infantry. She stepped to the very edge of the rift. The light cast long, strange shadows across her grey face. When the war is over, Dean, or if the sovereign falls and we require sanctuary, may we return to Earth. I looked at the massive alien commander standing in the ruins of my living room, wearing my old winter coat. I looked at the dark, rainy city outside my shattered window. We were a messy, violent, toxic species, but we were survivors. Yeah, Coriel, I said softly. You can come back. Just use the front door next time, and wipe your boots. She gave me a crisp, sharp, military salute. I didn't know the protocol, so I just gave her a tired nod. She stepped backward into the violet light. The air pressure snapped back to normal, with a deafening thunderclap, and the portal vanished. The apartment plunged into silence. The cold rain blew in through the broken window. The smell of ozone, lye, and burnt metal hung heavy in the air. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been. Then I looked down at the blackened, smoking crater in the middle of my floor. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. I walked over to the closet, pulled out a fresh pair of heavy nitrile gloves, and grabbed my mop. Someone had to clean up the mess. Did Dean's cynical bravery and Coriel's alien resilience keep you on the edge of your seat? Earth might be a toxic death world to the rest of the galaxy, but for humanity, it's just another Tuesday. If you loved this HFY sci-fi story of industrial cleaners and intergalactic warfare, smash that like button, share this video with a fellow sci-fi fan, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible audio dramas. What should Dean clean next? Comment below.